If you are speaking too softly and they can't hear you, they're going to ask you to speak louder. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, everyone, welcome. This is the second meeting of the Somerville School Construction Advisory Group. And this is our agenda. So we start off, we have some preliminaries. Our welcome to you all, review the agenda. We will take a minute to approve the meeting summary from the last meeting, and then we will do some introductions. We have some new committee members today. We also have members of our planning team who were not here before, so we will take a little time to do that. And then we will move into data presentations. So we have really, we have two core parts of the agenda today. We'll have data presentations, and then we'll have a chance to talk about the broad community engagement process, phase 1. So those are our two big agenda items. In the data presentations, we have two presentations. We'll hear from Rich Reiki about the K-8 capacity study. So some of the preliminary information that's been developed already about what the needs are and where the possible locations are, and just some of that preliminary work that's already been done. And then we'll also hear from teacher Megan Brady, who is going to tell us or answer any questions really, and give you any further information about the civic action study that the Winter Hill 8th graders did last year, where they began collecting a tremendous amount of community input about how people feel about the options on the table for the rebuild process. And then we will shift into the conversation about the draft process for broad community engagement. And that's, we sent you a draft document that has some of the information we would want to share for that process, what the components of a simple survey or input process might be, and then a description of just how we would do it. The outreach itself, and we're hoping for input and advice on all three of those things from all of you tonight. There will be a chance for public comment at the end of the night if we have anyone who would like to make public comment. Just to explain, we put it at the end of the meeting because we are hoping that it will then reflect what you heard in the meeting and be about the process, the materials and the topics we've talked about. We will have a little time for wrap up at the end, and we'll try to close no later than 8:30. Any questions about the agenda? Okay, so let's turn to the meeting summary. We are not going to be doing much printing of long documents and materials. We know most people are able to get them electronically. Please, the Wi-Fi in this building is hard to access. As a reminder, and maybe Mira, we can note that when we remind people what's going on, so that people will remember to download documents, so you'll be able to have them accessible for the meetings itself. But did anyone have any questions or comments from the meeting summary? And we're happy to hear any thoughts people have about the format, the level of detail, any other suggestions you might have about the structure, because we aim to make them usable. We don't, it's not we don't do this person said this and that person said that. It's really meant to be, here's really what happened in the meeting and the main ideas that were shared. Because we found that to be really the most useful in the long run for committees like yours. But happy to hear any feedback or any corrections, anything missing. No? Okay. So once we hear that everybody is comfortable with them, then we can get them posted on the website, and you all could then use them as tools for sharing with constituents. And we do have them in English and in Spanish, and we'll make sure those are posted both as well. Great. So hearing no, I tend not to take votes. We don't have to operate by Robert's rules here. So it's really just any objections, and if everybody's comfortable, I will assume that we're good to go. Okay, great. All right, well, with that then, let's go around and do introductions. And if you don't mind, Marta, I will, since you're here at the end, just your name, the group that you're representing, how you're feeling today.
I am Marta Guerra Bastian. I am in representation of the Brown School parents. I was good until yesterday. Now the winter is coming.
I'm Andre Green, Somerville School Committee, and I am feeling newly resolute.
I'm Matt Roberts, representing SPS parents out of my son in the West, and I'm feeling quite good. Thank you.
Matthew Daniels, representing Winter Hill parents as well as parents of young children. I have a kindergartner at Winter Hill and an almost 3-year-old. I'm feeling excited to discuss this today.
Hi everyone, I'm Amara Anasike. I'm the Chief of Staff at Somerville Public Schools, and I'm feeling hopeful about this process.
Mi nombre es Gandhi Aldana, represento a Padres Latinos y también tengo un hijo en 5º grado de Winter Hills.
Hi everyone, I'm Cassie. I'm a parent of a Winter Hills student, a 4th grader, also on the PTA, and I'm feeling tired.
Fair.
Ryan Williams, I'm a Brown School parent as well as a West parent, and I am the Somerville Council PTAs, and I'm feeling tired as well.
Councilperson Strezzo, I am the City Council representative on the committee.
I'm Julia Austin. I'm the art teacher at the Brown School and the Capuana, and I am feeling very hurricane-like, but in a good way.
I'm Emily Miaris. I have 2 boys at the West, pre-K and grade 2. My seniors representing SPS parents also. I also am really involved in the library, and we're actually doing a fundraiser at Flatbread today. So after this, if you guys wanted to get pizza, a portion of those sales go to the library. So
What's still going on?
yeah, it's all closing, takeout and dine in. So.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you. And so welcoming Amara and Julia, who are joining the group based on recommendations of this group. We were looking for parent representative or teacher representatives from the 2 schools, and Julia has agreed to step onto our committee, and there was a suggestion that the superintendent's office be represented here at the table. So Amara is part of our planning team, but she will also serve directly here on the CAG. I think you all met Nikki last time, but if you want to.
Sure, Nikki Spencer, Chief of Staff to Mayor Valentine, and I'll join you in it's dark and not lovely out, but happy to be here.
And Rich?
Rich Raish, Director
Raish.
of Infrastructure and Asset Management. The wind is worse than the dark and the cold.
All right. And
I'm Magdalena Gomez. I'm with the Investment and Asset Department.
yes, so welcome. She's now joined our planning team, so that's great. And I think you last time met Mira and me. I'm Stacy. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Rich. We're going to move right into our first agenda item around data. And Rich, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you this microphone so our recording will be able to hear. And if you want me to advance, that's for you.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So the presentation will be in a couple of parts. First, we'll give you an overview of a number of resources that are available, reports that are posted online, sort of give you an idea of what is in each one of those, a bit of an orientation to that. And then we'll take a deeper dive into the K-8 capacity study. So the first part first. It's important to understand that we started the process of understanding both the needs of the school system and the needs of the buildings several years ago with an idea that we would eventually be invited into the MSBA process. So a lot of the work that we've been doing not only advances our own understanding and informs the city's decisions on what to do with the schools, but also lays the groundwork for an MSBA process. And so as you have probably already heard, we've been invited into the MSBA eligibility period. We hope to advance into what they call the feasibility study. If everything goes according to plan, very first thing in 2025. So a lot of the work that I'll be talking about in the reports that we've generated would be stuff that we would have done in that feasibility study. So the hope is that we'll accelerate that feasibility study, having already done a bunch of this engineering analysis. So the first thing, just sort of step through the time frame on this. One of the very first things that Mayor Ballantyne did was direct IAM to start that process of looking into the buildings, which hadn't really been done before. In 21 and 22, we did investigate the Brown School and the Edgerly School as part of the building master plan. We had already been doing work to understand what we need to do in terms of our buildings for office space, both for municipal offices and for SPS administration. And so we had already done the investigations of the Edgerly as part of that with the idea that it would be home for SPS administration. But that work that we did in the building to understand hazardous materials, the structural capacity, all those things, that is why we were able to move so quickly when we needed to move the Winter Hill into that building, because we had already done a bunch of that engineering work. We did that engineering work at the Brown in 21 and 22. So in early 22, we then started to add the the Winter Hill Sycamore building into that assessment. The funding for that was approved with the fiscal 23 budget in June of 22. We then had to hire consultants, so it took a while to get the technical team on board. But basically, by the next year, we were in full swing evaluating the Sycamore building. In parallel with that, SPS was hired a company called Flow Analytics to do the enrollment projections district-wide to be the underpinning for planning for the Brown and for the Edgerly. In December of 23, that first phase of work had been completed, and we'll talk about the reports that came out of that. And that was coincidental with the MSBA inviting us into the eligibility phase. Next slide. As I said, the sort of chronologically, the first report that may be of interest to this group is the investigations into the Brown School building, which again was done as part of the building master plan. So there are 2 volumes that are available online. The second volume is the very detailed engineering reports. I don't expect anyone here to actually read any of those. If you are a complete and utter architectural engineering nerd, dive right on in. But in the interest of transparency, this is all the data on the building. The hazardous materials study, structural investigations, geotech investigations on the foundations. As a lot of people in the Brown School know, that there are some cracks in the walls. We've been monitoring that. We did detailed investigation of the soils around to understand if that cracking is a concern for the structural stability of the building. All of those engineering reports are in Volume 2. Volume 1 is probably the more interesting of the two to this group. It looks through that building, and again, sort of drawing the conclusions from those engineering studies. The upshot of them is that the building structurally is in fairly good condition, given its age, or maybe because of its age. Things were built really well back then. The cracks that you see are a concern, but not a primary concern. From a structural and geotechnical standpoint, we can fix those. So the building is, if I can invent a word, renovatable, as in it can be renovated. The biggest problem with it is making it ADA compliant, but the way to do that is to build an addition onto that building that would have a cafetorium and a gym and an elevator core that would then tie into the rest of the building. That report goes through. We did zoning studies and massing studies to make sure it's still compatible with the rest of the neighborhood, there were a few different options, but the general conclusion is that it could remain a K-5 school, make it accessible, renew the building, have a gym, have an auditorium, so it would be semi-modern, but there isn't an opportunity to expand the school population there. There would be no way to turn it into a pre-K-8. There simply isn't enough space on that lot. So all of that information is in Volume 1 and is worth taking a look at it if you want that. So jumping forward in time, the K-8 study, which that was the project where we did that same sort of investigation for the Sycamore Street building. Again, Volume 2 are all the engineering reports, where asbestos is in the building, the structural capacity of the building. Could we add a story to it? Things like that. The spoiler, no, we could not put a fifth floor on that building. But all those reports are in Volume 2. Volume 1, again, is the one that does more the investigation of what could be done to that building. But in addition to that, sort of same sort of investigation, how could we renovate the building? There is some renovation potential of the building. It is limited, given the nature, the layout of the building, the structure of the building. It's possible, but probably not preferable. If we were to remain at the Sycamore Street site, it is more likely that we would demolish the building and build a new building. But again, one of the reasons why we did all those engineering studies, including all the hazardous materials investigation, is so that we can understand what the costs of those are. So when you're doing demolition of a building, you have to abate and dispose of any hazardous materials. So all of that investigation helps us understand what the cost of either renovation or demolition would be, so that we go into this next phase with a much sharper pencil. So in addition to that sort of Winter Hill Sycamore building focus, the K-8 master plan also looked district-wide. And again, this is something that would have to be done. It's the right thing for us to have done for the city anyway, but it's also something that MSBA would need us to do for eligibility. Because the question that they ask is, if you look district-wide, acknowledging that there's a problem with the Sycamore Street building and you have to build a new building, is there capacity at the other schools to absorb some of that school population and make that building smaller? Or conversely, are the other schools in the district already at or over capacity, and therefore you would want to make that new building larger to accommodate that. So we started with that flow analytics enrollment study that SPS had commissioned. Across the board, there were some criticisms of some of it. I believe the school committee had some criticisms. I had some criticisms. We used that as a launching point and leveraged the district's enrollment folks to really look at the data and make some changes to it. So we sort of advanced the enrollment study to capture more data that we wanted to do. There's some interesting swings. Our spring population in the schools is always higher than the fall population. It's very strange. Like September 1, you think that's when you have all the students come in, and then you might have some attrition. In Somerville, it's the opposite. More families move in over the course of the year. So by the end of the year, we have a higher population, particularly in the younger grades, and also with special needs. Those programs always expand, and the special need programs are the ones that are sort of real estate heavy in terms of the floor space you need. So it's a very important point in our planning that we have to look at the June registration, not the October registration.
So you're saying at the beginning of the academic year, there's always more kids than were expected, or less?
No, there are fewer kids start in September than finish the school year in June. In the same year.
You accept more students as the year goes.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Primarily due to parents choosing public schools because of our special ed services, newcomers, especially immigrant families, and to a lesser extent, native-born families moving into Somerville during the year. Generally speaking, outnumber families who leave Somerville, who generally leave during the summer.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Can you speak to what some of those criticisms you and the school board had?
Well, so that over the course of the year thing was the first one. They were only looking at June data. They are at October data, October 1st data, not the April. Is it April or May? I think.
I think it's May.
It could be May. So that was one. The other was that all of their projections, and this is something that we have to continually fight. They look at nationwide averages, and nationwide single-family homes create more school children than multifamily homes. We are a community of multifamily homes. You can count on your fingers and toes how many single-family homes we have. So they looked at our real estate and said, "Oh, well, you don't generate new growth because you don't have the single-family homes." Yeah.
I was one of the leading critics of it. There were a couple of things. The first is they assumed East Somerville would lose young people as a result of gentrification. And I want to first of all start by saying, asking them to try to make economic guesses was part of why we hired them, as opposed to the group that normally does economic assessment for schools, which explicitly doesn't try to make guesses about changes in the economic status of the city, which meant that our last one that Somerville had done by them was wildly off. So we're trying to get a more accurate one, which meant we tried to make economic guesses. All our economic guesses assume no changes in policy. And if you assume no changes in policy, then yes, Somerville's going to continue to gentrify and continue to have a lower percentage of school-age children. As it is the stated policy of basically every elected in Somerville's position to try to increase, to try to resist that and try to increase the number of school-age families in Somerville, or at least maintain, especially in East Somerville where they're presuming massive losses that would not be quite yet made up by gains in already put it bluntly, already to 5 parts of Somerville. They were projecting best case scenario, a small but non-zero decline. Worst case scenario, a loss of several hundred students. We again hope that's not the case, and we're trying to make policies so that's not the case. But they didn't make adjustments that we did change any of the policies, and therefore are assuming a small decline that we hope doesn't happen.
Thank you.
The other thing that we did in the K capacity study was look at the programs in the other buildings, right? So we weren't just looking at population, in the buildings, the enrollment and how many classrooms, but we also interviewed the principals and various other program specialists to understand if there were additional needs in those buildings. And largely the answer is yes. Largely it is around after-school programming and around special needs, special services. Not just at the schools that have like the larger programs, but also the out of classroom contact time, like the rooms for counseling, and usually in the executive suite. There simply aren't enough of those types of spaces. So all of that data is in that K capacity study. Volume 1 has the summaries. Volume 2, in addition to all that building data, also has all the minutes from all those minutes, or meeting notes from those minutes that we had with the principals and everybody else. So there's a wealth of data if you really want to go super deep into it. So the next, I have to jump over to the PDF. We can go into the highlights of the K capacity study. And some of you might have been at that December 2021 meeting, and the presentation deck from that is available online. But I sort of pared it down to sort of highlights. And again, you can dive deeper into the report. You can watch that other presentation. But at a high level, now's a good time for questions.
Could I just say, I pulled the numbers this morning for the enrollment. So we exceeded, and these are probably October numbers, we exceeded the estimate for last year by 150 students. By the end of the year, it's probably 200 students. This year, I've been told we're also going to exceed it. So we're exceeding at least the medium estimate, maybe even the highest.
Yeah.
And if you go into, and like some schools are dramatic, like East had over 50 kids over the estimate. Kennedy had 58 kids over the estimate. The Brown trends are going down in the study, but in reality, they're going up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
so far,
question marks about how closely we should hew to the projections.
So far the critics are being more right than wrong. That's why about the pessimism of the study. And we're 3 years in, I think the third year since we did it. But considering time means nothing anymore, so I might be wrong on that.
Yeah. And to further complicate matters, there's going to be an entirely new set of enrollment projections because we're in the MSBA and they insist on using their own formula. We've been doing some back and forth, specifically with the district's enrollment folks, providing them some additional data, and they are now preparing their final enrollment projections district-wide, and we should be seeing them soon, along with the feasibility study scope and the agreement to move forward to the next stage.
I actually have a question about that from experience. This building is too small. Leave it as huge as it is, this building is already too small. And it's because their projections were, again, conservative and therefore wildly off. Are they learning from that in this round of projections? No.
It's a good question. I will say this. I think we did a better job of pushing back and providing additional data this time than last time. But inherently, Andre, you're right. They are, they under project. So right now the ball's in their court. We're going to see soon where they landed, and we'll probably still have to do a little negotiation from there.
Is that specifically true for other cities that have gone through this process as well?
It's hard for me to say. I don't pay it as much attention. I can ask around to my consultants and see what they think. Again, to Andre's point, it would be good to go back to one that's been open for 5+ years and see how well they did. Haverhill's has been in the MSBA pipeline for like 30 years, so it'll be really interesting. They've been to like one school every 7 years for 30 years now.
Do we know what percentage of kids in Somerville go to public schools versus private schools or charter schools? Like, what is the percentage that end up in the public system?
I don't know that.
We do know that. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I do know that our private school numbers are relatively low. Our public school numbers are about the 9% we capped at.
I'm pretty sure that post-pandemic, a lot of people flew to the private schools. So
We thought that would happen, but it doesn't seem to be showing that actually in practice. Or
Well,
if it is, they've been offset by people who came into the system.
Yeah,
Right.
I do think it would be interesting to see last year's freshmen and this year's freshmen, because sort of anecdotally, I've heard of a lot of COVID Catholics that are now coming back to the high school.
Yeah, it may have happened, like we all know anecdotal evidence, but like on net, we haven't seen it in our data.
Okay.
The other thing, to your point, is that Somerville has a ridiculously low percentage of school-age children, period. You have the lowest percentage of school-age children in the city and town in the Commonwealth. So like, does that mean it's gonna be more or less accurate? And the same way that we don't get as much money from like SOA and other state funding, because the formulas were set in the 90s, and we've changed, I've seen changed so much since the 90s. My guess is, and this is a guess, that we would, however inaccurate they are in general, they're gonna be more inaccurate for Somerville.
Gotcha.
Okay, so we can jump to the next one. So again, this was from that presentation, and so all this information is in the report. But it started with the enrollment study. Again, it massaged from the flow analytics. We felt a little bit better, but I think there's still some gaps there. You can see the heat map of where the students come from and projections for each one of the schools. But the next slide. The key findings, though, were that almost all the schools are reaching their capacity limitation. The demand for special education programs has been continuing to grow year over year, more so than general ed. One of the bigger needs across the district is that additional space for non-gen ed. When we're thinking about a building, it's important to remember that that the education program is only one part, an important part, but one part of the overall floor plan. There's all the other support services for art and music, physical health education, media, food service, guide and admin, and these circles are sort of scaled to give you an idea of typically the range of how that academic space compares to all the other support spaces. I think most everyone knows how our schools are distributed. Mostly we're all K-8, with Brown being the one exception of K-5. And then, at least on paper, Brown School kids matriculate to the West, Kennedy, and Winter Hill by geography. Although in practice, it hasn't been working that way because of school enrollment capacities at the sort of neighborhood schools that they otherwise would have been in. K study includes the theoretical student capacity of each one of the buildings based on number of classrooms and the programs that are offered. It's somewhat indicative of the size. The east is the largest school in terms of square footage. It's the largest in terms of population. Interestingly, the Healy and the Kennedy are roughly the same size in terms of square footage, but because the high needs and medical needs students are in the Kennedy, and they take some, the classroom populations of those classes is so much smaller, so there's more space needed. The enrollment capacity at the Kennedy is significantly smaller than the Healy. So then if we took that, that sort of building capacity number and then looked at what the projections were, and again, they're already wrong 3 years after the study, but in theory, the Argenziano and the Healy have a small amount of excess capacity, not an appreciable amount that would really make a difference in terms of redistricting, but in theory, they have some extra capacity. The West and the Kennedy are already over capacity, so that there's no capacity to pick up additional students in the whole west side of the city.
Can you explain what that negative 400 and 471 mean there exactly?
So the negative 400 and the negative 178, that was the sort of the thesis of the study was that the Winter Hill at Sycamore building needed to be either renovated or reconstructed, and the Brown School needed to be renovated or reconstructed. So in theory, we've got a projected 400 students at the Winter Hill and 178 students at the Brown that need a construction alternative.
So that's the 400, because it was 471.
So 471 is the theoretical capacity of the Sycamore Street building, and the enrollment projections for Winter Hill were 400. So the second slide was showing the enrollment projection for it.
I may have, sorry, because it may be a very basic question, but can the public system reject enrollment because of capacity, or are we, the system
Nope.
is forced to get all the kids
Correct.
that
One of my nightmares,
need the school?
one of my nightmares is some scandal breaks out at Prospect Hill, and Bessie closes the school, which I think there are probably about 200 Somerville students currently, give or take some, Prospect Hill, that we'd have to take in, and I don't know where we put them.
Okay.
Because that point about like the Healy and Virginia's, it's just capacity, that is not like, we can put them in the classroom, that is, we can stuff to find more kids in existing classrooms, make those class sizes bigger. Until we get to a certain point where contract and stuff would allow us.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you land, which is sort of a disaster. Okay, so again, with the idea that we don't have any capacity at I call them the post-90 schools, because like the West was built in 94, the Healy in 97, and then the Kennedy and the other ones were renovated in the 2000s. So with the conclusion that there's no room to redistrict and get students into those other schools, the projected population of the Brown and the Winter Hill, which combines to be 578, they need a construction solution. And so what the capacity study did, which is something that we would have had to have done in the MSBA process anyway, we then explored what potential solutions would be for that population. And again, with the idea that those students. They have core academic, specialized programs, and all that other needed square footage of space. We looked citywide, and it should be a shock to no one that we don't have enough real estate or open space or available big lots to build a school. And really the only locations that we have available to us are the ones that we already own and have a use on. So the Sycamore Street site, the Willow Ave site. We did look at the possibility of expanding the west, again noting that there's sort of a deficit of school space in the west. The west is actually a very small school on an even smaller lot, so there really isn't any way to add a few classrooms to the west. We did look at the Kennedy, and there is, as unpopular as that might be, the potential to put an addition at the Kennedy, which led us to the scenarios that were presented.
It's definitely getting a little off topic of that, but was the Cummings School ever considered as part of this?
So the Cummings School is also a shockingly small building on a very small lot. Because the size of a building that you could put on there wouldn't be large enough to serve even just the Winter Hill population, let alone the combination of Winter Hill and Brown, we sort of eliminated it from evaluation. You could, back up a second, that building is not renovatable. It would be a tear down and rebuild. And you could rebuild something there that would accommodate just the Brown population, but it's geographically disparate from the Brown. So we looked at it and eliminated it from further consideration. So that gives us the two building scenarios and the single building scenario. Again, looking at what our available real estate was, you can go forward again. The first is the two building scenario where Winter Hill would stay at Sycamore. And there are a couple of subplots of that. In the report, there's the massing study. Again, the more probable path forward would be to demolish the Sycamore Street building and build a new one. And this would be the mass of that to accommodate the Winter Hill student population. That would be combined with the renovation of the Brown that was in the other report that I talked about a little bit earlier. Those are sort of repeated from that. The other two building scenarios, as I say, we looked for other locations. We eliminated Cummings. The west is not possible, but in addition to the Kennedy is technically feasible, so we looked at that as an option.
One more question about those options. Did you ever look at smaller additions to both the west and the Kennedy?
Because of the site constraints on the west, there's no addition.
No addition.
we couldn't even add a classroom to it. It already has other than the Brown, it has the second smallest schoolyard in the district. And there's
County Edgerly too?
Oh, that's an interesting. No, less. It's bigger than the Edgerly. Yeah. So those are the sort of the two building scenarios, either renovation of the Brown or addition onto the Winter Hill with a reconstruction of the Sycamore Street for Winter Hill.
And Rich, is it fair to say, though, for this process, to clarify that this was with the hope that both schools would be accepted into the MSBA?
It would be. So yeah, so in terms of where we are now with the MSBA, that if this is what we look at, and this is sort of the basis for of part of this conversation here, is you could think of the top of that line gets funded by the MSBA somewhere around 49%, and the bottom of that is entirely city funded. So we don't get any grant money for the bottom half of that equation.
And they went into the MSBA rank though, rightfully so, Winter Hill first priority, Brown second, so I don't think it was a realistic assumption that they would ever fund.
Both.
Well, all right, I'm asking this question mostly rhetorically to get it out there, and to save my inbox, I am not advocating for this. But in theory, we could do, because the rule is you can have one project at a time with SBA. So in theory, we could do a complete Winter Hill process, and then after that was done, end the process again for Brown.
When you say done, you mean done, the building is completed?
Like,
Closed out and opened, like this one.
But yeah, but completed, like say, this one is completed.
Okay.
What he's saying is that they came into that process, and that's still a realistic option.
Yeah.
If the MSBA never accepts more than one school, why do we submit to?
Because it doesn't cost you much to do it.
Well, that's the question too, I don't know.
Yeah, it just costs staff time. Yeah, that's the honest answer. They were really mean to Jackie and me. Yeah, so.
I have a question. I'm sorry. I don't know if the Kennedy scenario is still like a thing, but I was just curious. I don't know if I knew this when these first were published, but if the Brown was at the Kennedy, would it be its own school attached to the Kennedy?
That would be a school committee decision.
Yeah,
It's like totally separate.
the design team was agnostic on that. We just looked at what would physically work.
That's kind of stated more explicitly. The city and the things decide what buildings exist. School committee decides what we do with the buildings.
Is that true if the Brown and Winter Hill are combined in the same space?
Good question.
I will say it again. The city decides what buildings we have. The school committee decides what we do with the buildings.
Well, I think that's a really helpful question to ask, because as it pertains to this committee, right, if you come up with ideas, for example, that would combine the schools, but from the input that you hear and the negotiations that you do, you have recommendations about how then the schools are used. Those recommendations would be going to the school committee rather than to the mayor, if I'm getting this right. I'm not sure I fully absorbed this before, but I think
in practice, that means it's always a dance negotiation, but that is the most formal way of explaining the differentiation.
Yeah, okay, so that's helpful and important.
So the study, or this study only focused on the property you already had, not any potential property to purchase?
Well, we did look at parcels that would be large enough to house the building. So and it wasn't just city-owned parcels, it was parcels in general, but also with a general focus in central west, sort of geographically close to the Winter Hill and or the Brown. And there aren't any parcels, single parcels, that would be large enough to house a building of that size.
What do you mean, a building of what size?
Of the Winter Hill size.
Parents have repeatedly asked me why the Archdiocese property close to the Winter Hill School was not questioned, assessed, explored.
We did reach out to the Archdiocese.
When did that happen?
22 and then again in 23. I've had a few conversations with the Archdiocese. And let's just say it this way. the Archdiocese is not interested at this time in selling that property. Or St. Clement's in Medford.
Right, or Matignon.
Or Matignon, well, no, they're selling
Oh,
Matignon.
yeah, fine, okay.
And we did not, yes, we were not part of the successful bid on that one. But that is the one that they're selling, and we were interested.
The property tentatively, for anyone that may not already know, I'm sure many of you already do, that there already is a school of the Archdiocese that is completely, almost connected to the Winter Hill.
Yeah.
It would also be.
So it's hard for me to understand why that wasn't a competitive question on the table with this.
As someone who's also been in at least one meeting with the Archdiocese, as much as I would love to criticize Rich here, no, the Archdiocese has been completely clear. They're in no rush to sell because they don't have to. like the one thing the Catholic Church can safely do is play the long game. And so like their feeling is we don't have to make any decisions about what to do that property right now. So right now we're not interested in selling it. It's still making them money because it's increasing in value. They're not paying taxes on it. There's no pressure on them to sell.
What was the location of that church?
It's right next door.
It's empty, and we really talked about leasing, and unfortunately, even with like leasing existing space, would need a gut rehab. Sure.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, we toured St. Clement's, and makes the Brown look like the Taj Mahal.
yeah, St. Anne's, because we were looking to use St. Anne's gym. It is not in good shape.
One more question about the Brown rebuild or renovation and addition. Can that be phased in a way that like work can start sooner, but then like the MSBA brought in later when we're done with the Winter Hill? Like, is there something we can do now and then do the rest of it with
On
the
a loan?
Maybe not an answer right now.
Yeah, I'd have to give it some thought on what the logistics would look like. It's not immediately apparent to me, but it's worth thinking.
Because that renovation and addition would require swing space for the Brown.
Yes,
students, right?
which is
So
also
completely, there's no other swing space.
correct. For, you know, so
Hold on.
the addition could be built, as unpleasant as it might be, while the students are in the existing building. But the renovation of the building would need it to be vacant.
And does the MSBA have any rules about you have to be accepted into the program before you start the project or anything like that?
Yes, if it's anything that they're going to fund, they want their tendrils in all the aspects of the planning.
So does that answer?
Strike from the record that I said tendrils.
I'll say the record for me too.
The option is still that that can still be split to where the Winter Hill School can be completely renovated. And we can move quick on that, and the Brown at a later date can be a consideration for future.
It could be, yeah, but again, you're also at that point, it's not a certain deal that they would then accept the Brown in 2030, because they will have just paid for this building and the Winter Hill, but it's possible.
In the document you shared, there were other options.
Yeah,
What
that's what
happened
we're
to
about
them?
We got sidetracked.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. So then we looked at the one building scenarios, which would combine the populations of the Brown and the Winter Hill. And so there are a few options for that one. There are a couple different permutations of using the Sycamore Street site. Again, that building would be demolished anyway, so you could demolish it and build a even bigger building, likely going north. And that's sort of the massing of that one. Then the next would be in terms of, it was almost done in terms of a costing exercise, but we wanted to build it out as an option. What would it cost to renovate the existing building and then add an addition onto the existing building. So that was a feasible option, more as a costing exercise than anything else. And then finally, combining the two schools in one larger school at the only other location that we have available to us, either from taking or owning, would be Trum Field. And this is just an example configuration of what it would look like. It would more logically fit on the softball field side than the baseball diamond side, so that would preserve the majority of the open space. And much like Argenziano and Lincoln Field, it would be sort of a shared open space adjacent to the school.
Can you speak to the site to the south that is the Public Works buildings?
Yeah, so there is a current tot lot across the street, but the majority of the site to the south is the Department of Public Works. That's not, I think that's the fire alarm. So we're just about done, right? So the other one building solution is at Trum Field, and that's sort of the layout of it. DPW is right to the south. DPW is not really a viable option for the site itself for a couple of reasons. One, it's important to the city to have an operational DPW. We've got enough place else to put it. Two, there were underground storage tanks that leaked under that site, so there is a restriction on it that basically that lot should only be used as a DPW yard. We wouldn't want to do any digging under it. It's safe, it's capped, the yard is paved, it's completely impervious, it's down gradient from Trum Field, and according to the state, we just leave DPW alone, and it continues to be a DPW.
So all of these options basically look at I assume you used a area per square foot per student times 578. So they're all looking at like 150. And I guess, was there conversation about maxing out any, looking at the maximum that could be built, or, like looking at any of these sites and just saying like, let's.
Yeah, so it's a good question. The Sycamore Street site is constrained. And while we could, in theory, build a building roughly for 600 students there, it wouldn't leave much in the way of schoolyard around it. It's also a very awkward site because of the grade of Sycamore Street. Like the existing building actually has like a half story, like it doesn't go all the way because of the hill. So it's an awkward site to build on. The Trum Field has a lot more potential to maximize. Even maybe have parking beneath, but I don't want to say the P word.
Sorry, I had a follow-up question, which was just, how good do you feel about the pricing exercise that, because it looks like you got unit costs for like renovation, new build, but you use those numbers in both sites, and it seems to me like new build on Sycamore Street is a lot more annoying than Trump. Those aren't.
Yeah, it's a good point. We did add some contingency to the Sycamore Street site because of the difficulties, but I don't know until we get to the next phase where we're actually talking to contractors. It's hard to really account for those costs. That's one of the reasons why with this building we went construction manager at risk, which is a procurement method that's allowable under Massachusetts procurement law that allows you to bring in the construction experts during the design phase. We did the same thing at the Poplar Street Pump Station, and even though it's a $109 million job and the most expensive subsurface thing that we've ever done, by bringing in that contractor as a CMAR, we were able to save, I think, $14 million on the cost of the tank because they came up with an alternative method. So, you know, I think we would do the same thing, with this to capture those sort of costs. Until you actually have a real construction manager, it's a lot of educated guess from estimators.
In terms of the cost, just thinking about this long term, especially with community and stuff, the Trump Field, one of the comments in the summary is that it would require the Article 97 open space
Correct.
contingency.
Yep.
How much cost does that add to the process?
So that's an unknown cost. We still have to track that down. We would have to offset at least 1-to-1 and figure out how to do that.
Where would that happen?
So,
And I guess also what's the time frame for that to happen?
so if this is a serious option that we're going to track down, that'll be the first things that we track down seriously.
I guess just in terms of the overall talking to the community about this, that feels like something that we need to know going into that conversation as well. Even if we don't end up going with Trump Field, I think that would be a number one question from the community about where that
But
open space is going to go.
If that is combining the brown, wouldn't the brown be available then?
So, I mean, in theory, if this combines the Winter Hill and the Brown, the Sycamore Street site and the Walnut Street site would then be available to demo and use them as open space. Now, they would be different programming available at that. You know, the Walnut, Willow. The Willow Street site is kind of small, but it would still be open space. Again, the hill at Sycamore, while it would give us a decent amount of acreage, it couldn't be a softball field. So those would be some of the things that we would have to navigate. The other thing that might be interesting is to see where the Matignon land sale lands and the open space that is in Somerville as part of that lot. Would be an interesting thing to see if we can negotiate with the purchaser of Matignon.
We decide with this building?
Hmm?
We do that in Carson, what we decide to do with this building?
Get the Matignon.
Open space, yeah.
I think, yeah. I'm safe.
Yeah, just pick it up.
Let's try to get it no matter what.
So I know there may be more questions, but I want to make sure that we give a chance for Ms. Brady to present or answer your questions as well. She has patiently given us her evening. So what I'd like to do is maybe ask you to hold additional questions for Rich. If you want to take a second to jot them down to yourself so that we make sure not to lose them. And then I want to invite Ms. Brady to come and share a little bit about, now that you've seen the 5 sites, or the 5 options, not that these are necessarily the options for you, but these are the options that have been presented to the community so far. And these are the options that Ms. Brady's Civic Action students used when they were getting input from the community. So, Ms. Brady, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you a microphone that you can clip on if you'd like.
I sent a Google Slides presentation over.
To me?
Yes, but I can share it with Amar. Yes. Does that hear okay?
The microphone's only for the video.
Oh.
They hear you just
That's great. While that's getting set up, can I just ask how many of you might have seen the student survey in the spring? How many of you might have taken the student survey in the spring? How many of you might have followed what the kids were doing? All right. That's amazing. That's like somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of us are already aware of the most remarkable students I've ever taught. So I am so grateful to have a chance to uplift their work, and I do believe that many of the questions I heard y'all raise last month is answered by what the kids did. So I'm excited to see how you all will build off of what our young leaders have already shown us. Oh, thank you. So just some background on why they did the project they did. Their educational history is one of immense disruption. They have been in 4 school buildings in 4 years, and that does not include the interrupted learning from Zoom school, right? So they came back, my now 9th graders, last year's 8th graders. In 5th grade, were at school at Somerville High. In 6th grade, they were at 115 Sycamore. In 7th grade, the collapse of the concrete forced their emergency move to Tufts. And then 8th grade was at the Edgerly. And out of that came really strong emotions from children who have been harmed by the school building situation. And that's just some of the emotions that students expressed over the course of 8th grade. And it's so important, I believe, for the adults to know how children have been hurt and how their school's experience has been negatively impacted. And there is an immense urgency for all of us to fix this. And I would be the world's worst teacher if I didn't center them in everything I do. And I just hope as adults, beyond the technocratic thinking and the logistics and engineering, we remember that schools are about children and about caring for children. So, my 39 students last year set 4 goals for themselves. Hopefully you have read their report. I believe it was sent out. Hopefully you have seen their 45-minute presentation to the school committee. So you are already familiar with their 4 goals. Their first was to research the 5 proposed options for rebuilding their school. Second was to share information about those 5 options with the community in all languages that they speak. 3, to survey the school community about their preferences. And 4, to share their findings with everyone. And I focus on their 4 goals for this little overview because the data results from it have direct bearing on your work. So their first goal was, as you know, to research the options. And 2 action steps that came out of that was that they researched the demographics of all SPS schools using the very publicly available data from the DOE, the Department of Education. And then to do basic algebra and to do some basic algebra and estimate then what the demographics would be if the Brown and Kennedy combined and if the Brown and Winter Hill combined, since those, as you know, are part of the options. So those links, you don't have to click on them, Stacy, but they would take you to that demographic data. Why I think it's significant for you is the demographics, the definition of community schools is foundational to the question in front of you of what schools should look like. And it answers several of the questions that you had last meeting around how big would a school be if we combined Kennedy and Brown or Brown and Winter Hill, what would the schools look like? So that's all available to you. The second goal that the students had, as you know, was to then teach the community about the 5 options. So they made multilingual video explainers in their own voice, their own narration in English, in Spanish, in Haitian Creole, and in Portuguese. They made those blue flyers that I passed out before your meeting, and they made posters for schools. They made an Instagram. Why I think it's significant. 1, from the presentation I heard in the last hour, these are still the 5 options, so this is still accurate information. Two, for a while, this was the only non-English source of information in the city, and it seems like we might still be the only streamlined, simplified, non-English description of the 5 options. So when you think about accessibility, I would argue what my 8th graders did is what we're all trying to do. And yes, you had several questions about what the 5 options are, so hopefully this helps answer. I can stop at any time, but I'm almost done. So then action steps from goal number 3. Goal number 3 was to survey their entire school community. The original goal was to ask everyone in Somerville. In the end, we asked 602 people. As part of that, we had multilingual surveys in all 4 of our home languages that we then also further differentiated by reading level, so a total of 12 surveys, 4 languages, 3 different reading levels each. We had talked in class a lot about the importance of data collection and doing it in an authentic way, where when you ask hundreds of people the same question, you need the answers to come in a way that you can then compare what they're saying and thinking. So we were very they were creative in their scales. Instead of just ranking a building's preference 1 to 10, they added emojis on top of it. So a 1 was like the bleh emoji, and then like the 3 was 2 thumbs down, and just I uplift that as like, what a brilliant way to then collect data that we all have we all know what the emoji means when we might not all have the same definition of what a 1 out of 10 means. So brilliance from the kids there. And then what was so important for the students as we were talking is to meet people where they're at when you are trying to get their feedback. So you can't just expect everyone to be following your Instagram, right? You can't just expect everyone to know to come to this meeting and give public comment, but how do you take your questions and your research questions to the people most impacted? So that's how we started to build out community networks with the PTA, with the Somerville Educators Union. PTA was immensely helpful in that. Thank you. The Somerville Educators Union, so that was really important. And why it's significant is I have never seen a broad community access survey like that with 602 responses, and they did all of it, start to finish, in 3 months, and they're 13 years old. So y'all have more than 12 months. Y'all are adults. High bar now. High bar. Good luck. And then goal number 4 was to share their findings with everyone. So that is why I continue to come here and share. They wrote a final report. It's in all 4 of their home languages. Linked in it is all survey data. So I think you've all read that already, or it's been sent to you, so you should read it if you haven't. And what I really celebrate about their work is that they took the data they collected, looked at what people thought of the different options. They used ranked choice voting to figure out what's the preferred option. And then at the end of it, they thought, in the spirit of consensus building, if we can't make everyone happy, what tweaks can we make to the different options so that they're more appealing? And the kids then wrote all of that out in their report about how do you make building a combined school at Trum better when it might take away green space. And they're like, well, then tear down our old school and make that a field. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I really, and I know that was a concern that many of y'all brought up last month. It's like those trade-off questions, and the kids addressed that. I think I just one more. And then recognizing that I was also kind of a facilitator of a broad community survey, which is very much your task as well. I just included a link to the Integrated Schools podcast, which if you're not familiar with it, highly, 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 highly recommend. It specifically looks at when communities are facing the question in the 21st century of how do we integrate our schools. They did a great series this past spring on Brown at 70, since in the same week my students presented to school committee was the same week that Brown had its 70th anniversary. And looking at other communities that have this same question in front of them around how do we reimagine our community schools in this moment of 2024. Brilliant podcast, Integrated Schools podcast. And then lastly, this is definitely switching my hat a little bit from Miss Brady to Megan Brady, I guess. But I know that there's no Winter Hill educator who has stepped up to join the committee. And I will say on behalf of my 95 plus colleagues that we are burnt out. We have had to move our classrooms 4 times in 5 years. We have advocated at public meetings 6 times. We have had to attend dozens of extra meetings outside of our contract, not required, don't get me wrong, but to learn how we're going to adjust to all of these changes. We have given up dozens and dozens and dozens of hours. If you want to know what Winter Hill educators want, just watch any of the meetings where we've had to turn out in force in the last 4 years. We've been very clear. When you give bad working and learning conditions, you hurt kids. And we're just asking for better. So, how can I help you? Yeah.
First of all, reading the report and I can't imagine how proud you are of the students. They did an amazing job. It's more impressive than things I see most adults put together.
Thank you.
You said there were 600 something?
602.
602. How representative, what does that represent? Is that sort of only students and staff of school communities, or?
It is 77 educators from the Brown, Winter Hill, and Kennedy communities. So the students asked me to email all of those buildings since they're the ones impacted. Can I go to their website? Do you mind, Amar, if I touch your computer? Okay.
I just usually take it out.
Oh, great. Yeah. Yeah.
I have to move it to here.
Okay. And then if we scroll down a little more, a little more. It's us. There we go. Thank you. Yeah.
And were the students were Winter Hill and Brown and Kennedy, or just?
Overwhelmingly Winter Hill, and then I believe it was 30, maybe 32 fifth graders from the Brown, so now 6th graders elsewhere in the city.
And what about community members? It was mostly Winter Hill or and Brown?
That is in one of the pie charts somewhere in there.
There are charts that have the data breakdown. If you have to scroll down a little bit.
I think those pie charts are just the demographics by schools. The ones you're thinking of are linked in the report somewhere.
What I'm kind of thinking about too is I think one of the questions I had last time is what does the city think we're missing to make the decision necessary? And what was sort of the response from the mayor's office about how this is helping her to make that decision?
I don't know if I'm the one in position to answer that.
I'm not sure that's fair to Ms. Brady. So, Ms. Brady, first of all, thank you because you invited the mayor to come and meet with the students. She asked a lot of questions, and they had a lot of great questions of her. I think that It really does set the bar for what our community process looks like for this. An important factor is that this is something that the entire community will end up voting on in terms of the debt exclusion. And so understanding that we have other key stakeholders, although the ones that Ms. Brady, you and your class looked at are really at the center of a lot of this. I also think if you read the report, one of the things that really struck me, and I know sort of came home to the mayor, was that they really advocated for today's second graders and for parents and families of our younger students who are going to inherit this school to really be actively involved. And so we're taking that into account. That's directly from 8th graders to the mayor's ears. And so that's part of the charge of this group. And I'm sure that this group will also come up with really important key stakeholders and groups that we haven't even thought of. So this is a fantastic thing to build off of. But we know that we have other groups that we need to talk to, and they've pointed the way. So that's sort of what we took away from our conversation with 8th graders and some of the things that we're hoping this group can help us with.
Do you have groups in mind?
Certainly younger parents, parents of younger children.
Got it.
Are one that we want to make sure that we take a look at. But for some of the groups that you're representing here today, involving some of our community organizations, our Chamber of Commerce, we are trying to keep in mind our seniors. And so there are lots of groups that I think this is a large community decision and deserve some voice and the options that are put before us.
Can you explain more what you meant by like the second graders who will be inheriting the school? Because my understanding of the timeline is that our second graders will not be inheriting this school. That it is, the timeline's longer.
Misspoken.
Oh, okay.
And as you can tell, I'm not a math teacher.
I think what was that last year our school building was still split, right?
Yep.
So last year's first graders was the youngest students that my students could interview without getting a field trip permission slip to go to a different building. It's true. I had to look into a field trip in order to try to.
Like 2 months down, yeah.
So we then centered our first graders as the most likely to see a new school. Yeah, that's what Nikki's uplifting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think from first grade, but down as well, that we have a lot of folks who will be enjoying the school building one day. And the kids were very clear that they want those folks at the center of planning and not have to go through what they went through effectively. The group also asked the mayor if they could have the first swing at the building if it's demolished, and if she's still the mayor, she has committed to at least involving them in some safe way to be continued.
It's going to be great. And to the then first graders, now second graders, because children are delights, the littlest ones voted on the options with little stickers chart, and it was the questions we simplified more to, do you prefer a really big school or the same size school, or are you happy either way? And it was overwhelmingly a big school, the reason being more friends. And that's just beautiful.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could just tell us more about the second conversation you had that was about community and like school identity.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff. And just, I read the summary, but just tell me more about what was top of mind, what the actual things people wanted to preserve were. Because I know it's a group that's been very disrupted, right? So like, I guess understanding that because it's something I don't want to lose in the decision-making process.
Thank you. I don't think I can recall off the top of my head what we'd said in those discussions. I would say that what the students read as what we'd talked about was like the buckets. I can just picture it was those questions on chart paper around the room that we were answering and then bringing into conversation. And mostly in response to how overwhelmingly we had from the community side and the students, but community was harder for us to interpret since we didn't know what adults might be thinking so much. That love of a community school, and then just wondering, like, what is that? And is the definition or conception of community school, does that vary by who you talk to? And do we all have that same innate definition? And we said, probably not. Sorry, I can't be much more helpful. Yeah.
During this process, I mean, outside of all the incredible work here, I imagine there were a lot of conversations. Do they have any unique ideas or potential solutions that might not have gotten captured in this?
I think everything was really well put in their report. Their most out-of-the-box thinking was their school bus system that I think was, you read that and you probably watched it in the presentation as well, but imagining a way to help kids just get around the city better and how that could then address some of the transportation issues. Yeah, I thought that was all them with the multilingual app, and you can use the bus lanes, and it was great. Yeah.
So, you know, I've been a champion for making sure this is as public as possible. And I want to say to the committee why that is, to Nikki's excellent point, obviously a decision of this magnitude's expense can't only be centered on the current students. It's got to be a city-wide system. But the people who are asking to make those decisions, especially once they vote, should be aware of the opinions of the people who are currently listening to the pain. So I'm saying that as we plan our broad community process, part of our process should be sharing this excellent data around with the people who are currently in the middle of it, as we think about what it means 10, 20, 30 years on the line.
Yeah, what's up?
I'm curious, as an educator and researcher, do you think that there is a way to center an i.e. maybe like weight student and teacher input in a way that is as close to representative of, you know, our school populations and is equitable and is actually like accurate? Like, is there a way to do that, do you think?
I am not a statistician. My sister was my guide in all of this. But the dream school that my students then described on pages 8 to 9 of their final report, I think in many ways, like, just answers all of the questions. And I think if a school like that, which is not asking for big things, it's not, wherever that were built, I think would be fantastic. It's a school with an auditorium, with a cafeteria, and a soccer field, and classrooms where everyone fits. That's what they asked for. And a pool. But the soccer field with nets is the most important play activity.
No.
Yeah.
I also want to thank you for the point about the Winter Hill teacher-educator burnout, because I brought this up at the Winter Hill governing board, saying, based on last meeting, that we were still looking for educators to help this process, and that was pretty much the universal response. I don't think that's been appreciated enough in general, that the amount that the Winter Hill staff and faculty has had to go through. I think rightly centering it from the beginning around the students' fears and anxieties, especially around the unsafe building, makes a lot of sense, but we shouldn't ignore the adults going through that too, and the burdens on them. So yeah, thank you for doing that. And I think that's also important to bring back to the community of, like, needing a decision to help people move on to the next step.
Also urgency, because as much as I wish I could say otherwise, it's not like the job's gonna get easier until we get into a new building, so the sooner we can get into a new building, the better for educators, just as far as doing their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add, we have known our school needed desperate help for a very, very long time. We have been compensating for that in our classrooms for a very long time, and it feels like there's no end to this tunnel because we do not know what is happening and when, and that is not good. So thank you for listening to my vent.
Thank you
All right.
so much.
You're welcome.
Really
Have a good one.
appreciate this. So, this was a very helpful presentation to, oh, let me grab the microphone back.
Yeah. Let's.
To segue us, I think, into the community engagement process that we want to do. Give me 1 second. Put this thing back up. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So, as we talked about last month, we were envisioning a community engagement process that builds on the work that's been done and that would have 3 phases through the process that you all are doing, right? And the first phase is to expand on this initial input about what is important to people. So as you heard, we heard a lot from the educators, mostly at Winter Hills, some from Brown. We heard a lot from the students, mostly at Winter Hills, some from Brown, and community members, right? Again, Winter Hill and Brown. And this is for current families that were in those schools at that time, right, and students. So the goal now is to try and continue that input process, to do it more broadly, and catch the voices of people we have not yet heard from. And to also, while it is true that these options are still relevant, the 2 building options, it would have to be clear that the 2 building options would mean either finding the funding from the city to fund the entire rebuild or additions for the Brown students, or it would mean waiting and hoping that the future, that there'll be the opportunity to get into the MSBA process later, right? So that is a little bit different than the information that was shared in the first phase, right? So I wanted to talk today about phase 1 of this input, right? So I said 3 phases. The first phase, find out what people care about. The second phase would be having refined options that you all might be ready to share, that might be not just where's the school going to be, but might include things like what would the transportation look like, or what would the programmatic choices look like, or other sorts of issues that you think would be important to include in those options as the students did, to try to make them better, each one better for the widest range of people's concerns, right? Yeah.
I have a question, because the numbers, they show the cost of construction of 1 building, 2 buildings.
Yeah.
But what's the guidance on the operational costs, right? Because I have to assume that it's more costly to run 2 schools than 1 school combined, or whatever, 1 larger school. So, but what are those numbers? And can we be presented with those numbers, even if those numbers are tentative, because it's, when you say wait or not wait, but the public is asked to wait or not.
Yeah.
But what are the costs
Yeah.
of running each future school in whatever model? So what are the costs
Yeah.
of running the schools in whichever decision? Because I think that is also part of the equation, not just how much it costs to start, whatever
Yeah.
option, how much it costs, transportation included. I think that's an important decision that everybody wants to make.
Yeah, yeah. So great question.
Anybody has those numbers?
Well, this is I was just going to ask, under whose auspices would developing those numbers? Would that be under you, Rich, or would that be under the school?
I'd have to work with the school. It's both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, because it would be things, operational budgets under DPW and SPS. So we'd have to work up those estimates between both departments, but it's something we could develop.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I sent to you all, and in the back we have some additional of these. This is a first draft and very sort of rough, and it's meant to do three things in this document. So pages 1 and 2 is meant to be the information that we would want to give to the public before asking them for input, right? So what do they need to know before giving us input, right? We're not at the cost phase yet. We're not at the option phase yet. We're just at the what matters to you phase, right? And so the approach we wanted to take was rather than saying, here's the 5 options, which do you like? Instead, to just say, what do you care about? Like, what matters to you, right? And for them to know enough about what's been done to date, what we've learned so far, right, that they can answer the question of what matters to them. So the first 2 pages the format would not look like this at all, right? The city would be working, to put this into plain language, make sure that it's accessible for all, right? It would go into the 5 languages, all of those things. But this is just to give you a sense of the kind of information that we were thinking might be useful for people to have prior to providing input. The 3rd page is the input gathering draft. So this is, we thought, asking really just one question, right, which is what matters to you, what's really important to you. And the examples here are building directly off of the feedback we got from Ms. Brady's students' survey and from the public input session that Rich was sharing you. After sharing those slides at that meeting last December, community members who attended that meeting, who I think, again, were primarily Winter Hill parents or Winter Hill and Brown parents, gave some input on little sticky notes about the 5 options. So what we did is looked at their input and looked at all of the input, the comments that the community members, the educators, and the students had from the survey that the Winter Hill students did. And we tried to synthesize those into these. This is what we heard people say they cared about already. And so that would be an opportunity for people then to be building on, not starting from scratch, right? And then the 4th page, the final page of this document, is not something we would want to hand out, but this is for you. Some of the things we were considering about how we would do the outreach, right? So it would be working with Summer Viva and Soya, and SFLC, right, to help meet people where they are, right, try to use some of those best practices, right, offer people the opportunity not to take this survey or to offer this input in lots of different ways. They could orally in a video, on a microphone, right, or a voice recorder, just tell you the answer, right? They could put a little sticky notes. They could do a survey online, right? All the different ways that people might do it. And then possibly some public meetings where they could go into small groups, talk about what they care about, right? And then come out with the results that way. So these are the three things I would love your input on. Is there any information in this first 2 pages that we're missing, or that you think probably we shouldn't have in there? Is there a better way or other ideas you have for how to collect the information in terms of survey methods or tools? And then lastly, outreach strategies that we should be using to make sure that we're really getting as much input from the broad community as possible.
My biggest concern is that if we limit this to November 18th through the first week of January, I don't think we're going to get a lot of high-quality responses.
Okay, so more time
for families. So I think it needs to be approached really carefully about that timeline. I don't want to slow down anything, obviously, but if we're just we're basically saying Thanksgiving to Christmas when people have a lot to worry about.
Yeah.
So I think consider extending that if we need to get good responses.
Building on that.
Helpful.
Also, I don't see anything with the special ed community in here, or any of the autism, as we know.
In which part? The outreach part?
The outreach.
Okay.
And also how much of a voice were they given in any of the questions, and if there are any questions or additional questions that specifically address that. One of the things that I've heard from parents is that a large school is very sensory overload for children, especially someone with autism who have sensory needs. That very much triggers them.
Okay.
So how has special needs, how has autism, how has special learning disabilities been included in this?
So like in school features.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
Building
Okay.
on, actually,
Thank you.
that's fine, because building on both the last comments, we know, SLC being pretty good at this, we know that reaching out to some of these communities takes more time. And so if we were to use the January timeframe, I promise you, we'll be coming here in January, when like, all right, we haven't heard enough from our single-parent families, our special ed families. I remember, like, I guarantee that's where we'll be in January, if we're only had a six-week time period to get this data.
Yeah. Helpful. Great. Yeah.
Can you explain more like what the interaction is between our group and the community engagement process? Like, what is our relationship to that? Like, are we going to be looking at the information? Are we going to be helping keep it out?
Yes. So, great question. So, both of these, this committee and the broad community process, together are the way that the city wants to be getting community input on this decision. And I think the vision was that this group both would help shape the broad community process as liaisons, because you bring this, knowledge of the different perspectives, and right, like we might hear more about, well, here's what the business community is going to need to be able to, if you're going to try and reach out to them, right? Or for the special education community, here's what right? So it's both the outreach advice, and you are the ultimate then recipients of this information that you will then use in your deliberations to come up with a recommendation to put forward, right? And you'll be able to say, well, because we heard these things from the community, these are the things we want to make sure that we include in our recommendations. Does that answer your question, Cassie? Okay, Marta.
So, how, I mean, I understand the qualitative part of the survey. How is this going to help us make a recommendation on the specific buildings and sites we looked at today? Or is there no relationship at all? Because one of the first questions I have would be, well, if there's a combined site, what do we do with the existing sites? And I think that a lot of people will have that question.
Yeah.
Because that could become like a community center. It could become, you know, a beer garden with a playground. Like, people might be interested in other opportunities for using that. I mean, unless we divorce these two things, you know, I just wonder if people are going to know about that, or it's just a qualitative understanding of what community wants.
Yeah.
Everyone will want their school close to.
Can I give a little, so one thing to say is, you'll see under process, one of the priorities is the reuse, right? So the first thing that'll help you know is, how important is that question to people, right? And if you hear, oh, that question is really important to people, right? Then you're going to say, well, we better dig deeper into this question, because if people's decision on, you know, is affected by whether we use, how we reuse these sites, right? Then you're going to want to start to think, well, how maybe we need to add that into our deliberations, right? And start to dig deeper into what are those different options, how would we even explore them, all of those kinds of questions. So the idea for this is to help you figure out which of these things matter most to people. And again, it's qualitative, right? But it's meant to try to help you, because it could then also, what you could do with this is have this help you evaluate different options that you all start to develop, right? Well, the problem with this option is this and this, but it does well at meeting this, this, and this, right? And that's what we've heard matters to people. Yeah.
I can say that to people, because we're only 4.1 square miles. And at the end of the process, we'll be 4.1 square miles. So how we use all the space matters in all the decisions. So I think we can safely assume it shouldn't be the determining factor, but it's something that's going to matter to people is what are all the organizations when it's done.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think you're getting at another point, is how we phrase it to the community is vitally important. And what I worry about is, I don't know if the plan is to use the 3 bullet points on page 1 in the communications. I mean, those are the questions we've been charged with there. I still worry about the phrasing of combine Brown and Winter Hill versus build a new building in some place with a certain capacity. Because if you make it about Brown and Winter Hill to the broader community, with all respect to parents not at Brown and Winter Hill, I've met a lot of parents who didn't even know that Winter Hill was closed. Like, so I think that phrasing is really important. I think we should make it clear that we are building a new school through some means.
Yeah.
And the question is where and capacity, without phrasing it about pitting communities against each other, because I think we'll get more and better engagement that way. I think that's kind of getting to the point where.
I think there are.
Wait, I just want to make sure we speak one at a time for the translator. Okay.
I wanted to add on that I think the phrasing is really important, because some of the and I don't want to get into the details, but like building a bigger school at Winter Hill is just closing Brown. It's it's like telling the Oakland A's have merged with Las Vegas. They've just closed, right? So the way we phrase it is really important. I think we need to be, because the way you phrase it can influence the answers. We all know that. I think we should also think about, are we trying to get ideas and information, or are we trying to get 37% support this option, 22% that option?
Yeah.
And the last point I want to say, we have to be careful that it doesn't just become a ballot stuffing contest, which demographic can rally more support and influence those percentages.
Yeah, yeah. So I just want to quickly respond to that, and I think the phrasing for the background, totally get that. That's important. But we're not asking people right now, which option do you like, right? We're very deliberately asking them what they care about, right? And that's why it's, having community schools, keeping unique cultures a lot, right? Like, so it's a chance for people to actually say, these are things that actually really matter to me in sort of priority order. And yes, the way we phrase all of that matters as well, right? Yeah, I want to hear more about the ballot stuffing, because that always is a challenge, right? If you have a very broad range of ways for people to give input, how do you sort of balance to make sure you're not having that situation? I want to, let's see, why don't we come to you, Emily, and then we'll.
I don't think we are asking people to vote on the options.
Yeah, we're not.
But I was just going to build on that and say that there are a few line items here that I guess I like the idea that, this group has a very narrow focus, and this is an extremely fraught issue. There's a lot of big feelings about it, and I think there's a piece that everyone wants to be heard. But there's also a bunch of questions in here that will just get a lot of feelings that aren't actually useful for the decision-making process. Are we really going to suggest any option that doesn't provide safe and accessible outdoor play areas for the school? And I don't know, there's, and I heard it too in the civics thing, the idea is to provide a really great, I don't think anyone here wants to make a crappy school for anybody, right? And so, I don't know, I feel like there's a few things in here that it's like, let it be understood, this is about making a really nice facility. There are some pretty narrow questions.
Yeah, helpful. I will just say, I think there were some options where the school playground was across the street. But maybe being clear about that's what we mean, not like they're not gonna have a safe whatever, right? But there were parents or there were members of who answered the community survey or the student survey and said, I don't like it because the playground's across the street, and it's not safe for kids to have to cross the street to go to their playground. So that's what that meant. But your point, I think, larger point, well taken. Yeah, Cassie.
Yeah, I would agree that a rephrase of a lot of these would be good, because maybe what one person filling out the survey considers to be safe and accessible isn't what the next person, and it's also maybe not what's written down in policy. But I guess I kind of have a question for the group, which is, do you all think that people would weigh these aspects differently if they had the same information that maybe the most informed person in this group has? Or are we just trying to get people, what are they thinking about right now with the information that they have right now? Which things are important to them? I mean, I don't know if you had thrown a survey like this at me when I first moved to Somerville. Some of my answers would be a lot different than what they are now, that I'm on PTA and I go to governing board meetings and I'm really involved in my school community. And I guess a note on that is, as a PTA member, I can't bind myself to any advocacy opinions as a PTA person if the entire PTA isn't behind me on it. So if my position on PTA is gonna be behind any decision that the city makes, it has to have the whole PTA behind it. Otherwise, it's not valid. So I guess, I don't know, I'm curious from the rest of you all, if you think that there is a need for people on PTA or in the school community to get the same information that we're getting as a group who's supposed to be the brain trust on this decision.
Can I frame that a little? Can I offer a different way of asking that question? Right, the first 2 pages is meant to be, what do you think is the most important things that people do need to know in order to be asked for their feedback, right? I don't know that we can tell them everything. So I think the real question is, what are the things you think people most would need to know to make the information they would share with us about what's important to them, most meaningful. Right? And so we did our first cut here, right, which was more about what has happened so far. It doesn't say anything about costs, right? Because we're not there yet necessarily, though it gives people a chance to say relative to other things, how important is cost to you, right? Because it has it, but it doesn't, because we're not asking them to weigh options, we're not telling them, you know, we could say, maybe it'll be helpful to say different options have very different costs. So that's part of why it's important for us to know how important cost is for you. So I guess that's my question, right? Is like, what are we missing when you look at this as a very informed person, right? What other information do you think would be important for people to know to be able to share their input? Yeah. Can I come to you in a sec? I'm going to come to first. Yeah. Did you want to go?
No, I didn't know.
Did you have something to say?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. Just around school features, I wanted to piggyback off of what Councilor Strezzo mentioned. There are other accessibility factors that we might want to outline here in terms of needs and wants of community members. And also out of school time, I think she mentioned something about a teen center, but even within school spaces, we have a huge out of school time program with spacing issues, so it might be important to kind of just flag that for folks.
Okay, good.
If anything, I've heard that it would be,
I was just going to let Andre speak and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
So as far as the framing, which I agree with everyone is very important, there may be some value in framing it along the lines of how I think the problem needs to be solved, right? I go back to Rich's slide about the seats, right? Somerville Public Schools needs X number of K-8 seats. Currently, we have 400 over them of seats that are functionally unusable and unsuitable for minor education. Another 200 that we can use, but they aren't up to standards we want for our community. So the city has an obligation, therefore, to provide us, in the long run, 600 seats or whatever the numbers are. Yeah. When figure out what to do with those 600 seats, what are the things that matter? And I prefer that framing because, you know, in theory, a school committee could decide if we were given one 600-seat school to merge two different schools or to do other things or to change the programming or whatever. Like that is ultimately an educational decision made with every resources given to the school committee. And obviously, it could be that we close the school and move it over. We could say, actually, to the special ed, this school is too big to do this programming in, but we can move existing Kennedy School programming over or whatever, right? Like, there's a variety of decisions that could be made once this district is given a set of resources. So the real question is, what are the values you think we should be doing when deciding how to allocate those 600 seats?
And I think, sorry.
I want to let Gandhi speak. Yeah.
No,
she was
next
next
in line.
yes, please.
I was next in line. So, right, with school culture, this first question, maintaining small schools or diverse integrated communities within schools or retaining unique school community cultures, connectedness, and identities. I think this is a priority of all of these at the same time collectively, and I don't think this reads right.
Wait, so
The first, school culture.
Yeah. So these were three different things we heard people say matter to them about school culture. Some people said, small schools are really important. Having small schools, matters a lot to me. We had other people say having racial and socioeconomic diversity within schools is very. These aren't mutually exclusive, but they are sort of meant to reflect different sets of interests that people mentioned in the surveys. Does that make sense? Or which piece of that doesn't make
I
sense?
think that it's a collaborative, this is pretty much a priority of so many people, that we want all of these things. We want the diversity of the communities.
Yeah, I mean, some people, it's more important than for others, right? I guess the goal here is to try and identify for all the community members what things matter to them. Now, you may decide as a city, well, whatever people think, we think these things are more important, right? That's fine. But the goal here is to say, you know, for some people, right, we heard from the young students, for example, they don't want small schools. They want big schools because they want more friends, right?
But at the same time, you can still maintain a small school and have diversity.
Sure.
And retain unique school
Yeah, these are not
So-
mutually exclusive.
Right, but if someone has to choose one or the other to rank that.
Yeah, it was meant to give them
Right,
a range of choices of all these things, which is most important to you, and they could include all of those. But I'm hearing you, are you saying, like, how would you like to do that differently?
Let's hear from everyone.
Okay.
To build off of your point, Andre, and your point, sorry, I feel like I've talked too much. No, you should go ahead.
I'm having trouble tracking everybody at the same time, sorry. Go ahead, please, Candy.
Aparte de la escuela, lo que estamos hablando es sobre la encuesta que vamos a hacer. Hay que tomar varios puntos de vista. Uno, como lo decía Casi, es que una pregunta básica de la encuesta es, ¿tú conoces las condiciones de la escuela donde están tus hijos? Porque de eso va a depender la respuesta. Porque si es un padre que jamás se ha acercado a la escuela, no sabe ni él mismo qué expectar de la escuela. Pero si es de un padre que está involucrado como nosotros, tenemos otras expectativas acerca de la escuela que queremos para nuestros hijos. Entonces, ese tiene que ser para mí como un punto importante para que cuando se sondean las encuestas, saber de dónde viene la respuesta de un padre que tiene conocimiento o de un padre que no tiene conocimiento hacia la escuela. En lo que respecta a lo que decía Kristen, tiene razón, porque preguntarle a la comunidad acerca de la cultura que espera de su escuela, siento que abre mucho campo a que las personas expresen su individualidad. Y aquí entramos a un campo que perderíamos el objetivo, que es el edificio escolar en sí, más no, o sea, la cultura o los grados o algo que se va a hacer, porque de por sí la cultura escolar creo que es algo que tiene que ver ya directamente el currículum escolar, y es allí, o sea, la comunidad no se puede meter en cómo van a ser dadas las clases, cómo van a ser distribuidos los salones de clases, porque acá lo que no tenemos que perder es el foco de la pregunta. ¿Qué quiere de la escuela? Que sea amplia, que tenga muchos campos, que los niños tengan buenos escritorios, buenos mobiliario, que tenga más tecnología para dar las clases, que los maestros tengan todos los implementos necesarios para dar la clase. Siento que el enfoque es eso, porque estamos hablando nada más del edificio. Nosotros no podemos decir cómo va a ser el currículum, cómo se van a distribuir las clases, los maestros, los grados, ni mucho menos qué el director quiere trabajar en esa escuela. Siento que ahí donde va, cómo vamos a redactar lo que es la pregunta, y también sobre si les preguntamos o no acerca de que si una sola escuela o dividimos las escuelas, al decir que vamos a crear una escuela, ya no va a ser Winter ni va a ser Brown. Tiene que ser hasta un nuevo nombre que integre a la comunidad.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's pretty much exactly what I was about to say too. I think it's a construction advisory group.
Yeah.
Because I think all of these questions about school culture and everything, they're super important, but they're the remit of the school committee. They're not ours. Right? Like we're advising a site to build a school. Everything that goes in it is on the school committee to solve. Obviously, we need to make sure that the space can accommodate that. But I think a lot of these questions can be solved in different ways, regardless of what the siting recommendation is. In terms of capacity, I think it's a little bit of a different question there. But still, I think to your point, Andre, it's school committee could decide to put whoever they want in there, and I think that's, we shouldn't lose sight of that, because I think we can get lost in the weeds of something this group has no, and the mayor has no oversight over.
Yes, I would add one caveat, right? Like, building, all, like, in a vacuum, building a 800-person school versus say building 2 400-person schools or 4 200-person schools does to some degree speak to what do we value as a community, right? But yes, I would say trying to overscribe what goes on in the buildings is practically and legally a fool's errand.
And I think that should be the focus of the survey in terms of building size and location, rather than a lot of these more specific types of, like, modern and attractive facilities. I assume it's gonna have to be.
Yeah.
If that's that should be a priority no matter what.
Yeah, okay, I hear you, yeah. Marta, and then we'll come to Paul.
I mean, I think that what we want to get out from this, if I understand, is to get the backup for our recommendation, whatever it is. So we cannot ignore the community. We want to hear from them. But I guess that my fundamental question is this going to open more than the question, or is this going to help us narrow down the options, even though I think that there's 3 options, not 5. And if we want to use this to narrow it down, I think that I agree we should be more selective with what criteria we use, so that it doesn't, just explode into a lot of other things that are not pertinent to our group.
Yeah, okay, great. Paula?
What I want to say, because following the presentation, also something that might help us come to a best decision. The city already went through this process. East was already destroyed, East was already displaced, and we rebuilt, right? I mean, almost nobody remembers that, but that happened already. So those parents are long gone, because most kids are already out of high school. The kids that went through that, but some of those parents are actually, with the younger siblings, still in the system, and some of those teachers are, a few of them are still at East. So what I would suggest is, at some point, in the interest of efficiency, to consult how it went when this, because the city already did it, right? So what lessons can we learn from 10 years ago? What went right, what went wrong? I mean, I'm not saying to stop, to delay, but that was done in, I don't know, was 2000, anyone remembers? I think it was 2009 to 2013, so it was 4 years. Could it be done faster? I mean, I think that is an important input that we could look at and see from the community or the city or whatever records that can help us make a decision and not make the same mistake twice, if mistakes were made. And I second that this is about a building, so let's ask things about distance to school, and let's look at barriers, right? In each location, there might be roads. I mean, let's maybe put more attention in crossings, in stuff like that, that will be more in the minds of families and the going and coming back from school, and maybe not talk about culture, but we can put that in a lower, in a later question. I mean, I think that we can refine the location, be more granular.
Yeah.
Like, do you mind if your kid has to cross a main intersection? Something like that, right?
Yeah.
Easy and safe for students to walk to school is a little vague, right? So we might, I think we should be more granular about that, the location and the building itself.
Okay, great. So we are running out of time because our interpreters, we have to let them go soon. Let me put this proposal out and then I will take your comment. My proposal is that Mira and I will try to synthesize some of what we heard by way of advice. And then we will come back out to you
with maybe a request for a little bit more, like which of these things do you like and we should include, or how would you suggest? So we do just a little bit of surveying of all of you to try to continue to refine this. I think we heard loud and clear the timeline needs to be expanded. And so that, yeah, that's my proposal, is that we work on trying to refine this based on what we've heard from all of you, and then we bring it back out to you. I also want to propose that we don't have a December meeting, because basically we'll be gathering information from the community. We won't have more of the data quite yet to share, and we know December is such a challenging time. So that we would then come back together in January with some information from the community, with hopefully the school committee, or the school building committee having actually convened and able to continue on with our work. Does that sound okay?
So that's not planning to have something ready by December 18th?
No, we still would want to try and have some, not by November 18th. So we are going to work on this.
December 18th.
Did we say December 18th?
That's what it says, December, or does it say November? It was November.
Right, my previous thought had been November 18th, that is next week. I was going to get your feedback, I was going to revise, and then we were going to launch. We might need a little more time to refine and get a little more feedback, but I still think we should try to launch, and then, but go longer. Go into January so that people have more time.
I guess I'm saying, like, based on the feedback here, it sounds like it's more than a little bit of refining, because I think there was a lot of good feedback and we had to cut it off early, so I don't know. We do need to meet more and discuss about that.
Will there be drafts?
So maybe we would.
We won't have any CIP or additional budget numbers.
Right, but we could just, I mean, if people wanted to have another December meeting to just talk about this, we could do that and then launch just in January. Do people want to do that?
Yeah, I like that idea.
Okay, okay. The December meeting will have to be virtual. The December meeting will have to be on Zoom because meeting space is, we've been told by the city, very hard to get in December. There's so much going on. But we've only gotten 2 people who said that, who responded to our survey of what dates worked for you in December. We heard December 18th from those 2 people. So go back and fill out that survey. We'll send it to you again and see if we can find a date that week to convene virtually. Okay. And then January we'll be back. Yeah. Please introduce yourself and share your thoughts.
Hi, I'm Uma Murugan, and I'm with the Winter Hill School. And on behalf of the Winter Hill School, I was on the PTA, have been for a few years now, and I wanted to speak from the perspective of someone who's worked at the schools very closely and inside the schools as well. I would want anyone who takes the survey, especially if they're not familiar with the Winter Hill, to know that there's a tremendous sense of urgency in getting the new replacement building built, finished, and opened. From the family's perspective, I would want people who take the survey to know that our children don't have a playground. Our littles don't even have a play structure at our school right now. I would want them to know that our families are struggling to get our kids to school on time and safely, and are exploring new ways that are unfamiliar and teaching those new ways to our kids. So that's been a struggle. I'd want them to know that as PTA, we helped the school secure a grant for drama curriculum implemented last year. We couldn't do it at the Edgerly where we are right now, and we had to do field trip forms for whole classes because there's no one single room that can hold a whole class of 40 kids. And our upper grades are up to 70, 75 kids. And we had to literally schlep them over to another building, do field trips, to do a single workshop. The student assemblies are just basically impossible. Our teachers basically had to scramble to find a space for band to be taught this year at the Edgerly in an effective way. And I would want our survey takers to know that what Mrs. Brady said, our teachers are tired of moving, and the least number of disruptions would be something that everybody wants, families and teachers and children. So these are things I think would be nice to like preface before asking the community for their feedback, because I feel like our needs as a community have to be centered first before and understood before they weigh in with their values. That's my comment.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Thank you all for today. I'm sorry we went late. We did lose 10 minutes to our fire drill. We will be sending you materials. Please do fill out the survey. We will try to find a date in December that we can come back together, and the agenda item will basically all be on refining the community engagement process, and then we will hope to launch that in January. So, thank you, everyone. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think waiting it.